Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. If you enjoyed today's content, please click like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Please share the video to your friends and family if you think this is something they would be interested in. In part 1, we talked about ability, permission, and possibility. For part 2, we're going to talk about giving advice, necessity, the lack of necessity, and also prohibition. Let's begin. If you want to give advice, two things that you could use would be should plus a base verb and then ought to plus a base verb. Remember that you don't put to after should. It is used with ought to. They both have the same meaning and they mean that this is a good idea. So in the first example, I can't find my phone, I should look for it or I ought to look for it. In the second example, we might be late for the meeting, we should call the office or we ought to call the office. Remember to use the base verb and do not add ing, do not add ed or anything else. It is just the base verb. Although should is more common than ought to, most of the time you will hear ought to as oughta, oughta, and this is used in conversational or informal speech. The negative of should and ought to is shouldn't. Ought to is not usually used in the negative, so even if it's ought to, the negative will still be should not or shouldn't. In the example, to stay healthy, we shouldn't consume sugary food and drinks. If you want to sleep early, you shouldn't watch TV before bedtime. To form questions, you can use should plus your subject and then your main verb. In the example, the family is going on a trip. What should I bring? I need directions to the warehouse. Who should I call? It is common to use should with WH question words, but you don't necessarily need it. You can start your question with should. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I bring this? And so on and so on. Ought to is not used when forming questions, so instead of ought to, remember to use should. When we add the word maybe to our advice, it kind of softens the advice into a suggestion. Let's take a look at the two examples so we can compare them. If someone says, I don't feel well, your answer might be, you should go to the doctor or you ought to go to the doctor. But when we add maybe in front of it, we say maybe you should go to the doctor or maybe you ought to go to the doctor. It becomes more of a suggestion rather than direct advice. Aside from should and ought to, you can also use had better, and they all mean the same thing. But a more effective use of had better is that you are implying that if they don't follow your advice, something bad will happen. Let's take a look at the examples. You had better call a taxi if you had a drink. You'd better not drive because you could cause an accident. Using had better means that if someone doesn't follow this advice, there might be a bad outcome. Of course, you can still say you shouldn't do this, but using had better makes it a little more stronger. To express necessity, meaning something is needed or something is necessary, we can use has or have to, have got to, or must. For example, you have to come to work on time. You have to do this because this is important. You have to change have to has depending on your subject. So if your subject is in the second person, Peter has to, not Peter have to. We use have with I have to, and the third person, you, we, and they. It's the same with have got to, but have got to is very informal and conversational. The last one that you can use is must. However, must is something used in formal language and also in legal documents and instructions. The past form of have to is had to. So in statements, you can say Alicia had to distribute the notes before the meeting started. So this means that she had to do this in the past. For questions, because this is the past tense, we need to use our auxiliary verb did. But we're going to put have to back into its original form. So did Alicia have to distribute the notes before the meeting? Remember that the past tense will be contained in our auxiliary verb did. But in the present, you can ask questions by adding do or does. So in this case, we can say, does Alicia have to distribute the notes before the meeting starts? For the future, you can ask, do you have to go to school tomorrow? Just remember to use a form of do when asking questions using have to. The negative, of course, would be don't or doesn't or didn't in the past tense. It just means that something is not necessary or not important. So, we don't have to come to work tomorrow since it's a holiday. Peter doesn't have to come to work tomorrow since it's a holiday. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is prohibition, or something that you must not do, or very simply, do not do this. Here we're going to use must not or mustn't. Our examples are: students mustn't cheat on their tests. You mustn't drink and drive. Take note that I am not pronouncing the first T, but emphasizing the last T. Don't say mustn't, but it's just mustn't. So now that you've learned several different auxiliary verbs, I hope that you use them often and that you can use them correctly. You can of course interchange some of these to make your sentence either stronger, or you can make it softer by adding maybe. So if you have any questions, please feel free to comment down below, and I'll see you on the next video.